I mean, Tim, what you just said raises my next question in that are there logical grounds, I mean, prior to physics for holding that any one of presentism, possibilism, or eternalism is preferable or more probable than any of the others, or that rules any out before we ask whether current physics is more sympathetic to one or another? What I'm hearing you say is that if there is one past, there will be one future. That you sound like an eternalist in some sense, but maybe
if you want to call it that, I mean, I don't, that just don't say, people say that and then they say, oh, there's a block and there's no motion, or change is an illusion, or stuff like that. That just doesn't follow at all from anything I just said. You just named three things. I guess if my choice was eternalism, presentism, or possibilism, I'd go, yeah, I'm an eternalist for the reasons I just gave. What's wrong with presentism? I mean, possibilism, you're going to have to describe to me because I'm not quite sure I quite understand even what it is. What's wrong with presentism? Well, first of all, usually to even state presentism, you certainly do need this kind of preferred foliation thing, at least as I understand it. So you say there's something like all the stuff that exists right now. And that is supposed to pick out something. And then you say, and that's all there is. And then you say, but gee, don't you think it's true that, say, there were dinosaurs, or don't you think maybe, let me use another example. Don't you think it's true that Socrates had a particular blood, right? He was O or A or B or AB. He was something, right? We don't know what it is. We'll never know what he was. There are no retrievable records that you could ever find that will settle that question. Nonetheless, there's a fact about it, right? You say, well, what makes that a fact? I would say stuff about the past. Now, the presentist doesn't have any stuff about the past in that same way. So it looks like the presentist is forced to say, well, if there's any fact at all about Socrates' blood type, it has something to do with what's going on right now. And since we can't find anything going on right now that seems to settle that issue, it looks like you're stuck with saying Socrates didn't have a blood type or something like that, which just seems lunatic to me. I mean, is that a logical objection? It's more a sanity objection. Of course he had a blood type. I mean, he existed. But what are you talking about? And the facts that make it true that he had a certain blood type are facts about the past. So if you have a theory that denies there are, in some sense, facts about the past, or they have to be reconstructed as facts about the present, I just don't, what are you doing? And why are you doing it? I mean, I'm puzzled.
Yeah, it's really hard to see how you get a debate going. Yeah, so imagine I'm a block theorist and I say, earlier there were dinosaurs, and now the presentist comes along and says, no. Pastness adheres to dinosaurs. And then I say, well, aren't you just using a kind of temporal operator that, kind of one-to-one mapping with my earlier than relation? And yeah, so then...
and you might wonder, what are these dinosaurs it's supposed to adhere to anyway? I'm not sure that the present is...
Yeah, and then I think it's your question.
Errors of pastness, do they?
That's right. So then, but now the dinosaurs don't exist. Well, and then I'll say, well, they don't exist now. So are we just fighting about the scope of the existential quantifier? One of them opens it up, one of them shrinks it to a slice, back and forth. But then if you say, well, there is a difference between, that in the past, there were dinosaurs, but there weren't unicorns. What's the difference there? And so then they have to make there be all these kind of weird facts so they can make what you just said, Tim, true, that there were dinosaurs. But now all those facts are starting to fill up the block, and it becomes very kind of block-like, and so then you start thinking, well,
and institutional facts don't look like physical facts anymore, right? If you're just filling up the past regions of space-time, you're filling it up with what? With atoms and electrons and all the stuff we think that exists. But if you're filling up the present with ghosty, weird metafacts that make claims about the past true, even though, I don't know, I find it very hard to take that stuff kind of
I think in some ways, I mean, I have actually a kind of cynical sociological theory that maybe I shouldn't say, but really it's like the perfect way for metaphysics to inoculate itself, or to make it so that it's not inoculate itself, to make itself so that it can't be tested by science in any way, or be relevant to science, because you've now picked the perfect property or a predicate to use, existence. Is the only thing that differs between the theories is about what exists as of when, but existence doesn't have it doesn't smell, it doesn't have any color, it doesn't have anything, it doesn't enter into the network, the causal network of things, and therefore you can't explain anything, which is my ultimate complaint about it. Because I think the idea is that presentism will explain why I think that there's the now is distinguished or something like that. But just by saying it exists, that doesn't connect it in any way to anything where I can explain why I have the intuitions I have.
Tim, I'm a bit perplexed about why you see the future as being equally real as the past. And that, I mean, as you've already mentioned, we have facts about the past, where we know facts about the past. The present was, in a sense, caused by the past. And it just, in general, seems determined in a way that the future isn't. And I can understand why one might think that there could only be one possible future, or there will only be one future.
There's only one actual future.
Right. Without one thinking the future
I said this whole actual future.
What I'm saying is that one can accept that there will be only one actual future without thinking of the future as being real in the same way that the past is.
Well, I'm just a little puzzled what the view. I mean, look, there's the phrase attributable to the great philosopher Doris Day, "Que sera, sera," which strikes me as just a triviality and not a deep metaphysical principle, right? A bunch of stuff is going to happen. What makes it true that this will happen rather than that will happen? Well, stuff that's yet to happen. I mean, it's the future that is going to, as it were, be the truth maker of claims about the future, just as it's the past that's the truth maker of claims about the past, like in the case of Socrates' blood type. So I'm not quite sure. Of course, there are differences in epistemic access. That's just a fact. We know different things about the past and the future, right? I know the weather in the past 7 days in Lugano a heck of a lot better than I know what it's going to be for the next 7 days. That is an interesting asymmetry and one worthy of some consideration to explain. And I think lots of relevant work has been done to explain it in terms of statistical mechanics and various things. But suppose some people think if you go back kind of to the Big Bang, you can go back earlier than that there's an earlier epoch, right? Cosmological epoch. I mean, this is a view that, say, Roger Penrose has. And it may very well be that that's true. And it may very well be that because of the Big Bang and all this kind of very hot mess in between, our epistemic access to the previous epoch is nil or nearly nil. Would that make it any less real? Not in a bit. Not even slightly less, right? Why does my epistemic access to it have anything at all to do with its reality? I just don't see the connection. So maybe you can explain it to me. Epistemology and metaphysics are just different disciplines. They're engaged in different questions. And, one of the big mistakes of logical positivism was to kind of try and reduce metaphysics to epistemology somehow. And we all know how that came out. It's not a happy story. So in what sense, I mean, at one point, David Lewis says, look, people in the Middle Ages who died of cancer, their suffering was just as real, right? Just as real as people today in hospitals. Well, probably more intense, but anyway, just as real. And people who suffer from cancer in 30 years, they're suffering just as real. In some moral, right, evaluation of goodness and badness, nobody gets extra points for where they sit on that timeline, or fewer points. So I'm not sure, what is the intuition I'm supposed to be? What's the strange intuition in thinking there will be a future?
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, I lack the sophisticated vocabulary to make it clear, and perhaps it's just because it isn't clear. But I think what I have something in mind is a four-dimensionalist view where I'm just like a big worm. We're all just big four-dimensional worms, and my past parts, the things that have already elapsed, seem to me in this view in which the past is as equal as is as real as the future. The past part of me is just as tangible as the future part of me.
Yeah, they're intrinsically, they're just the same. They're made of electrons and protons and doing stuff. I mean, they're not categorically different at all. I mean, maybe this will help. I'm not sure if this will help. People often say, gee, space-time is just four-dimensional and I'm just a worm. And their thought is like making a four-dimensional space, right? So you say, I've got a two-dimensional Euclidean plane. Now I add another dimension. I have a three-dimensional Euclidean space, right? I have a kind of a worm through that. Well, maybe I can add another spatial dimension. But that's not what's going on, because nobody thinks that space-time is a four-dimensional spatial object or has a four-dimensional spatial structure. This shows up technically. You use a Lorentzian metric, you get a light cone structure, you get a whole bunch of stuff that is not just adding another dimension. And that structure can be used to represent temporal structure as different from spatial structure, right? So the time part of space-time is different than the space part of space-time. It's just different mathematically, geometrically, structurally, in every way you can think of. So none of this suggests, right, that time disappears or something. I mean,
Well, I guess here's hopefully a clearer way of putting it. But to say that the future is real, looking at it in the same way that the past is, looking at it this way, is to say that not only is this fourth dimensional component of me already fixed and stretched into the past, so the past is real, but it is, in a sense, already fixed and stretched out into the forward direction, as opposed to growing into the forward direction.
The word already has a meaning in English, and it means it refers to stuff to the past. So no, your future is not to the past. So it is not already, if by already you mean what we mean in English by already. But that's trivial. Let's just say the future is to the future and the past is to the past. And, you know, to say that the future is not, I mean, people do this all the time. They say, oh, you mean the future has already happened? No, the future is to my future. And already in English, the meaning of it is it refers to things to my past of the moment that I use it. It also has this indexical component, right?
I'm always talking about this, in my undergraduate classes where we talk about time, and then, fatalism comes up and the block universe, and people, will say, the future, if the future already exists and it's already fixed, then doesn't that mean there's no free will? And, if you think of the kind of block universe, it's just a list of the actual things that happen. That's it. And it doesn't give you anything about the causal structure, about what could happen or would happen. It just tells you, so if I, hopefully I don't, if I die by getting, hit by a car, right, when the interview is over, that's something that would be true. Did that have to happen? Well, maybe if we threw in some physics and there was a bunch of causal forces and stuff to force me to, for that to happen, then maybe. But just the mere fact that it's true doesn't mean that it had to be true. So, in the fatalism, literature, they call it the modal fallacy, that people want to go from the fact that something's actual to that it had to happen.
Right, that's certainly wrong. And there's a good physical question about determinism, namely, does the state of the universe, suppose we throw in this foliation, it just makes things easier. So we can reasonably talk about the state of the universe right now. There are some issues about that in relativity, but let's leave those aside. So here's a good question. Given the laws of physics and the state of the universe right now, are there different alternative futures compatible with the laws of physics or not? If not, then you have a deterministic physics. You can ask that just as well about the past. You can ask, given the present state of the universe, are there alternative pasts that are consistent with that and the laws of physics? And it could come out either way. Determinism is a well-defined question, but it's not the one we're talking about. Whether determinism would take away free will or whatever, I disagree with that as well. I'm a compatibilist. I think there's no problem having free will, even in a deterministic universe, where in some sense, everything was already determined at the Big Bang. I don't think that takes away free will. That's another discussion. But anyway, determinism is just a very different question. Even if the world is indeterministic, I think there will be exactly one future, and the totality of reality will be specifying everything that happened to the past and to the future, right? Which will be four-dimensional in this mathematical sense of four-dimensional. Even if it's indeterministic, that'll include how all the indeterministic things came out.
I don't think there's anything really to talk too much more about on this. Well, there's a lot to talk about, but we don't have to. But just to try to underline one thing that Tim said, and so a good chunk of my book was about how the fourth dimension is not space. That the difference between the time-like directions and the space-like directions ends up has huge effects throughout physics, and then huge ramifications all the way up to critters like us, I think. And so, and I wonder how much of philosophy of time, or traditional philosophy of time, is actually sort of based on this idea that the block is this four-dimensional spatial block versus the block it is.
Well, just to put a bow on this then, if you're saying, Tim, that the future is real, only amounts to your saying that, using my example, that all of our space-time worms will grow and be concrete. And as I understand you, it does not amount to the assertion that it is fixed, which would be conflating the future with the past. Then we're on the same page.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't think that's quite it, and I don't like the word "grow" there. Growing is something that persists through time can do. Right? A puppy can grow. Why? Because it persists through time, and at a later time, it can be bigger than at an earlier time. That's what growing is. Space-time worms, maybe you can say trivially they grow. I don't know. To say they grow seems strange, because when a puppy grows, it means at a later time, it's bigger than at an earlier time. There's this problem, as I say, it's the same problem, and let me just kind of ping this off you to see if this is what's in your head. People who say, okay, you believe in the block universe, and in a certain sense, I do. They say, oh, that's static. And I say, what do you mean it's static? The word static in English, or stationary, or frozen, or fixed, refers to things that persist through time and fail to change as they do so, right? In other words, being static only applies to things that persist through time. Just as changing only applies to things that persist through time. A single event can neither be static nor change because it doesn't persist through time. Now, does the block universe persist through time? Well, no, as I say, it's not in time. Time is in it, right? So it's neither correct to say it's changing, nor is it correct to say it is static. It contains all change, right? It also contains everything that happens to be static. But without putting the whole of space-time into yet a hypertime or something, you couldn't even ask a question like, is it static or changing? And we don't need a second-order time. The only time we need is the one in the block. So I'm not sure if that helps or not, but I'm not, when you say things are fixed, I'm not sure. I mean, I just need an articulation of what the property is you have in mind and how you're applying it to the future. If you're saying, is the future fixed, you might mean, again, the deterministic question. Does the present state of the universe, together with the laws of nature, already determine what the future will be? I'm open-minded about that. I think it could go either way. I'm perfectly willing to imagine deterministic laws and indeterministic laws. But this just seems to be an orthogonal issue to everything we've been talking about.